Welcome back to Seek a Strength. Welcome back to Seek a Stand. This clip is taken from our most recent podcast series. This full podcast with Kelly Starrett is available on the channel right now. In today's clip, he talks about the use of PEDs in sport and, more importantly, how training must adapt and how the work of a physiotherapist must adapt around increase in injuries from PEDs, but also the increase in hypertrophy that follows from PED use. As always, this video is brought to you by the Seek a Strength app. The Seek a Strength app is loaded with all the most up-to-date Seek a Strength training programs. It also has dynamic coaching logic built into it. So as you finish your training sessions, if you have to change any of the loading or any of the sets and reps you completed, your future sessions will reflect that, and it will more closely follow what you'll be able to do and push that line a small bit further, get a small bit more out of your training. Also, you're not left on your own when you're using the Seek a Strength app. We have an inbuilt coaching bot that's been trained on all of the Seek a Strength content that's out there. So every YouTube video, every podcast, all of our coaching seminars that we've done over the last 5 years have been fed to it. So it has a lot of the answers to the questions you're going to have mid-session. Also, video feedback is available through our members group. If you want more details, go and follow the link below. It's available on iOS and on Android.
On the subject of recovery and those elite athletes, and obviously don't have to specify anyone here, but as we know, elite athletes are no strangers to PEDs or any related substances. Is there anything from maybe a movement mechanics kind of point of view, or your kind of professional side that you've seen is just wild when it comes to outcomes from PEDs, in terms of you've never seen this problem before compared to someone who doesn't use PEDs but who is also a high level athlete? Is there any major differences that you kind of consistently see crop up between the two?
There's a reason that a lot of the bodybuilding goes along with some of the strength training, because we need to put those tendons and connective tissue and give them a chance to catch up with the ramped up machinery. So it's easy when you start to see weird fascial strains and tendinopathies and things, and kids are really big and strong and they're in sports where they're incentivized to use PEDs, then that's something we just have to keep an eye on, just because that you can get so big and strong and the body doesn't catch up. It's the same thing that happens, so everyone knows, to all my teenagers I work with. The teenagers are on massive amounts of steroids. They just happen to be self-made. Their bones grow like weeds and their connective tissue lags behind, and they have all these Osgood-Slaughter, all these tendinopathies. They become muscle bound because their muscles are so tight because they haven't grown to lengthen out the tensions. So they're not tight as in like I'm tight, I have pain. They're tight as in like I just grew 3 inches and I have to grow 3 more inches of hamstrings. Yeah. So I think we can lean into that model and say, hey, that's probably what's going on there. I did hear from some world-class coaches recently that in the 80s, the greatest stack of all time was steroids and cocaine. Just so we're clear, I just want everyone to know how high the bar is. Steroids and cocaine is actually the greatest training stack of all time.
Dara's just a fan of the cocaine. You're missing the steroids is the problem there.
The 80s, man. The 80s were, and these are world-class coaches who were like, yeah, it was wild in powerlifting. We're seeing just crazy outputs.
There's a few world records, Kelly, that we've heard are set with cocaine as one of the pre-workouts. We won't say which, but you can guess.
Oh man!
Yeah. We could tell you after.
We can tell you after. We'll tell you after the.
Is it smelling salts? Is it really smelling salts?
Oh, it's not smelling.
Definitely not smelling salts.
Well, this is what I'll say is, I've been in and around a lot of sports where people are incentivized to use PEDs. It's not my expertise, but there are people in my gym in the past who are in sports that allowed that or whatever. And I have athletes who are being tested by USADA and they're not allowed to shake hands. I'm like, you guys can't touch, you can't let's be cool here. The bottom line is, and I'll just repeat this over and over again because I think PEDs and SARMs are everywhere. I never saw any of that stuff make a good athlete great. I saw it make great athletes greater. Yeah. And what I mean greater is that they could handle freakishly high levels of work. And I'm not talking about bodybuilding. I really just think the aesthetics of bodybuilding aside, what really, when we're talking about is, can you work harder? And now we have a set of tools in place that is, we're between the nutrition and some of the other things, you really have to make the case for it.
It is really hard to talk about that because You know, a lot of times the online discourse in a lot of places currently is, yeah, but it's gear. You know, you're like, look, the gear PEDs are definitely helping this athlete, but he or she is still a million times better than you would ever be. Not only the fact that they've set up their life to be a professional athlete, not only the fact that they are using PEDs, which again, without a doubt, and we always talk about it, that it does help, but they were just born to be a better athlete than you. There's nothing you could do to catch up to them. No amount of PEDs would do that, you know. And it's kind of, and it's such a hard balance to strike because yeah, the PEDs do work, but they're still better than you know. And it's not even a subjective kind of insult to that person.
No.
It's objectively they're just made of different stuff, you know. And it's a funny balance to strike without insulting people.
CrossFit is probably at risk of having people believe that if they eat a certain way and train with a certain modality, they could be elite. And I'm like, no, you know, there's been enough times where I've been standing around parents, you know, and they're like, my child is, and I was like, have you ever seen a unicorn? And they're like, no, like they're like a real unicorn. I'm like, yeah, have you seen a real unicorn? And they're like, no. And I'm like, but if you saw a real unicorn, you would know what it is right away. And then we'll go to a tournament and there's a unicorn there, one unicorn and 2,000 kids. I'm like, anyone spot the unicorn? And people were like, oh, is that what you mean? I'm like, yeah, that kid may get a Division I scholarship, may, right? You know, I think it's one of the things that I just watched the David Beckham documentary, which is so good. And you're like, wow, he's been great forever. He was a little tiny little bloke on the field and he was great. And that leads me to thinking, how early did he start taking steroids to be that good at soccer? When he was 5 years old, when he was 3 years old, in the backyard?
I can only imagine cocaine. I'd imagine at that age.
Man. So, you know, Usain Bolt said it best. He's like, if you were great, you were always great. And I think what we can often do is look back and say, show me how long you've been great, and what you'll see is there's a repeated pattern of greatness forever. And I think that's what's really remarkable. And I'm like, I'm sorry if you didn't wake up great. You know, you're probably not going to be great.
At the moment, I'm trying to squat a pretty big weight, high bar, you know, and a lot of times, at the moment, I'm squatting like 5 times a week, and I'm changing between shoes just because it's novel, you know, and I'm doing jiu-jitsu and squatting and conditioning, and people are like, why are you wearing those shoes? And they're like, oh, why did you do that to barefoot? And I'm like, look, it doesn't matter, you know, it's the first time I squatted at 17, I could squat 120 for reps, high bar, you know, and it's just, we've coached thousands of people, and it's that. And I do like to say it a lot because it's like, don't, like, forget about what I'm doing. Listen to what we're saying when we talk about squatting, but don't wear one shoe and not another shoe or something just because you saw me doing it. Like, forget about it. You know, it's a waste of your time, and it's disheartening if anything, you know, because I could wear the same clothes as LeBron, but I definitely cannot dunk at 5'9". You know, it's not, it's you pick your lane essentially.
I think that's one of the things.
You found your sport.
And it's not dunking basketballs.
But I think that's one of the things that having a very talented young athlete in a CrossFit gym is so useful for that CrossFit coach, because it's the ultimate arbiter of reason of just like, oh, you want to go to the games? It's like, she's 15 and she jerks more weight than you. You're not going to go to the games. It's like,
so true.
Stop spending €400 a week on CrossFit gear. Just be happy with your training.
I know. Look, I just want everyone to know that, like, one of my goals is just to be less gross for my wife. Less gross. Not look good naked, just less gross. And I can start to ask, like, what does that look like? And I will tell you, on the other side of 50, you know, my training looks different. I don't need to handle, I mean, it looks different. I can't put enough energy into my aerobic system these days. You know, it doesn't matter what I do with my diet. I'm this old man's strength. Turns out deadlifting heavy for 20 years makes you thick in the middle. Who knew that? I didn't know that. And then my friends were like, oh yeah, that's why some of the bodybuilders don't deadlift, because it gets them too thick. I'm like, noted. And, you know, the real goal is, what's your goal? What is it you want to do? And I think when we ask that question, then we can kind of work backwards and make sense of what's going on. What is it you want to do with your body? And if you don't want to do much with your body, you can probably train however you want to train. And I think that really is the decision tree matrix, where I'm like, hey, I appreciate where you're coming from on the internet, but, you know, one of my friends was like, hey, do you follow this guy? And I was like, oh, he has 2 million followers. And I was like, oh, it's just bodybuilding. That's super cool. That guy has nothing to say about all of these other sports and skills, but man, he looks good with his shirt off, and he has 2 million followers. And if you want to be a bodybuilder and look like that, cool, you can do that. But that has nothing to do with winning a world championship or going faster in any of the sports we're talking about.